This guilt trip they try to do over slavery, I find really ridiculous for a lot of reasons. I mean, the obvious reason is that no one owns slaves. Like, none of us have ever owned slaves. We never knew anyone who owned slaves. But also because slavery is a sin, is a worldwide global sin that for thousands of years, everybody across the entire globe in every culture of every race owned slaves.
Mm-hmm.
And if they didn't own slaves, they were okay with the fact that slavery existed as an institution. It was a global institution.
Well,
for
the
thousands of
same
years.
people that keep on talking about slavery 100 years ago in America are also part of the party which now enables more slaves than have ever existed in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Child slaves, sex slaves, labor slaves, wage slaves.
Slaves.
And they use that as a cudgel so we won't look at that other stuff. But America has more child slaves now coming across the border. And, every family's going to get one. And they aren't even tracking them or nothing. They're going to have a little kid in their house who they say, this is our, special cousin or whoever that's going to be doing all the unpaid labor and watching the kids. That's how it works. Mm-hmm. And they're all down for it.
Yeah, I mean,
they're letting it happen.
A lot of people don't realize that slavery, slavery was officially actually legal as recently as the 1980s in Africa. Africa was the last place to actually have the institution of slavery legal.
But Libya sells black people as slaves now.
Yeah.
Libya sells black people for $200. You can buy a black slave. And in Gaza, they do too. Palestinians own black people. And we don't get to hear any of that. But here we sit up to about here with BS from the Democrat Party. And any blow against that empire is a blow for freedom and liberty and for God, I think. So I'm glad you're doing it. I'm glad you're funny. I'm glad God gave you a gift of humor, which takes a real lot of thinking to make something funny, because you got to take two different disparate ideas and bring them together in a big smash. And you did it. So, I think you did good. I think you made a good film. I hope you'll make more. Are you thinking of making more?
Absolutely. That's the one thing I mentioned, doing a podcast, because the podcast I do is, I think what you do is great because it's like you get to have interesting conversations, right? And there's a lot that could come out of a conversation. But the podcast that I do is like political commentary, so it's just me talking to the camera. And
well, you do a lot of thinking to come up with that.
Sure,
content.
Yeah, and it's right, exactly. And I think that there's some value in it. But the thing about that is it's very tied to the news cycle. And so I put hours and hours and hours of work into doing this podcast, and I do the show, and then by tomorrow nobody cares anymore because the news cycle's moved on. And then you make a movie and you see that, okay, it's possible to create something that people care about for more than 5 minutes. What Is Woman came out 2 years ago. People still come up to me about it all the time and talk about what the movie meant to them. So just that alone, to see that it's possible to create, to be in the daily content grind, and then to create something that has some staying power is really refreshing. And it's like, I want to hold on. I want to keep doing that.
Yeah.
I couldn't go back to just the daily grind of content that's so temporal and is forgotten so quickly.
I think you say new and different things about just racism itself.
We move the mic a little.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think you're saying new and needed things about racism itself in the culture. I think it'll open up a lot of dialogue with people. But I was going to ask you, what do you think? I mean, you probably don't even want to think about this, but I do, because it always happens to me too. But the naysayers, and the trolls, how they're going to come for you. Have you thought about what they're going to say? Because when I was watching, I was like, oh, they're going to say this and say that.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't thought much about it. I'm sure they'll have a lot to say, and that's fine. I know you're used to it. I'm used to it, and I don't worry about it. I think that, in fact, I'd rather have that than the alternative, because I know that, especially with the left-wing media, they'd prefer to just ignore this.
Yeah.
And even with What Is a Woman, it was a big success for us, but the corporate media ignored it for a long time because it was on our platform. And so they felt like, well, okay, we can just ignore that, pretend it doesn't exist. I want to put it somewhere and then have the success with it where they can't ignore it. And they have to come up with some naysaying, whatever criticism. And so if that starts, if there's a bunch of, I'm sure we're going to get terrible reviews. I'm sure that's going to happen. And that's fine because it means that you can't ignore it. You had to at least acknowledge that it exists.
Do you think, though, consider this, do you think that there has been some sort of a cultural shift and that it's in the process of shifting even more? Because like I told Greg Gutfeld, his show being the #1 nighttime talk show is evidence of a cultural shift.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot of shifts happening. And in the entertainment space in particular, like you mentioned, Gutfeld.
But I mean on media.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is because, like we were talking about, the left has sort of left the playing field on some of these things. They're not making comedy anymore, really. They don't make entertainment the way that they used to. At least they don't make it as effectively as they used to because they're putting the message before the story. Mm-hmm. And so that's part of the shift that you're seeing, that it allows these kind of like insurgent characters. I'm one of them.
Yeah, you are.
To come in and say, all right, I'll do it then. And I hope that it continues,
Yeah, I hope you inspire a lot of other people. And I hope that your movie does so well that it inspires theaters to, open their doors to other than a certain narrative. Because I think people are ready to see something.
Yeah, that's also been the case for a long time, that, Hollywood, just for example, I mean, there's so much money that these Hollywood studios could make by making biblical films.
I know.
And every once in a while, a biblical film is made, and it does amazingly well because there's so much hunger for that. And there's so many great stories in the Bible.
Oh my gosh!
Even aside from the spiritual resonance of them and truth of them, these are also just great stories. And so I've
wanted to do that forever.
Yeah, and you open up the first page of the Bible, you can just go through the whole thing, and there's 1,000 billion-dollar movies in it. But it's amazing that Hollywood hates us so much that they'll even sacrifice the money. They're like, I don't even want $1 billion from you people. I hate you that much.
They did that with her.
That's what they did with me. Yeah. I was a #1 show.
Yeah.
With 28 million viewers, and they canceled it for a tweet they didn't understand because they don't understand anything about Jewish people. Or what the Iran deal meant to the Jewish people. So
what do you make of that? That
they canceled me, their #1 show that they've only had in like 15 years since I went off the air before. They didn't care about the money, and they didn't care about their stockholders. But I'll tell you, I don't know what kind of capitalism that is. It isn't really, can't be capitalism.
Yeah, it's not, because they're willing to sacrifice the money.
Yeah.
But just based on their pure resentment and hatred.
Well, they don't want to lose the culture war, and that's
it's the culture war.
And that's more important to them because it's an ideology.
They said, one person said, I'm just afraid she's going to humanize Trump voters.
Yeah.
Well, you wouldn't want that.
No, you definitely don't want that.
So you see